Thank you, Norma. That was a wonderful presentation. Our next speaker is Arthur Torrington, the CBE. I'm sure that's a name that's familiar to many of you who have an interest in Black British history, which I assume all of us do who are here. Arthur Torrington focuses basically on African history and heritage in Britain and also in the Caribbean as well. He's a co-founder of the Equiano Society and the Windrush Foundation, and he also is an independent historian and community advocate. Arthur Torrington will be presenting today a paper entitled How Africans in the Caribbean Hastened Emancipation Day. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Arthur Torrington.
Okay, thank you very much. Now that's the first slide, and I'm going to ask Angie if she could hand out some leaflets or some flyers, in the sense that encapsulates the talk that I'll give to you. So if you can help me with this, please. Now, that long heading, that long title, can be abbreviated into two words: making freedom. In the sense that it's about Emancipation Day. 2 years ago, it was 175 years since Emancipation. And a lot of people didn't realize that that was a commemoration in its own right. The same way that you've got 100 years after the First World War, what Windrush Foundation did was to commemorate the emancipation of Africans in the Caribbean. 175 years. But the thing about it is that that commemoration is often missed in terms of emancipation, whereas in 2007 you had a commemoration of the abolition of the slave trade. The focus there was slave trade. Now, our attention has to be drawn to emancipation, the emancipation of Africans, in the sense that they weren't slaves and they continue to be slaves. So the emphasis on slavery, to me, it could be misguided if one doesn't talk about emancipation. Let's take the Holocaust in terms of you've got people in the Holocaust, in these in these camps and labor camps, but eventually they are liberated. And you speak about the liberation and you commemorate that liberation, as we're doing, I think this year there is this particular commemoration again. So what Windrush Foundation did was to commemorate the emancipation of nearly 1 million people, African people in the Caribbean. And that is exactly what we try to do. And eventually, when you do read the text, you'll see that the exhibition promotes the 1st of August as Emancipation Day. How many of you have ever thought of Emancipation Day in terms of the 1st of August? In the Caribbean, it's a holiday. In some of the islands, or most of the islands, it's a holiday. Again, it's commemorating a particular important day that African people in the Caribbean commemorated from 1834. It's not done in this country. I mean, I've actually written to some of the authorities about it, but that's political. But the point is this: commemorations of events, especially emancipation, are important. And in fact, we want to direct African people to commemorating such an event. And I can tell you this as well. On the 1st of August, 1834, even in America, emancipation was commemorated. Right? In the sense that, although the Africans in America, North America, and Canada, well, in fact, Canada had emancipation, but in North America then, let's say New York, let's say other places, Africans were enslaved, but their slave masters gave them the 1st of August as a holiday. They were given that particular privilege. And do you know something? They commemorated the 1st of August until 1865. That's what they did. I've got the evidence in the sense that I was in America, in Philadelphia, and I went to a particular place in Philadelphia and I saw a plaque that said the 1st of August, right, 1842. And what happened in this part of Philadelphia was that these Africans were celebrating Emancipation Day in solidarity with their brothers and sisters in the Caribbean. They hadn't had emancipation yet, and they were attacked by some thugs and youths and other people, and people were killed. Celebrating Emancipation Day, and people were killed in Philadelphia. And I've got, in fact, I'm sorry I didn't bring the slide to show you, because I ensured that I actually have a copy of that slide about Emancipation Day as evidence. So Emancipation Day is an important day. The 1st of August is an important day because on that day, although it was legally free, legal emancipation, it wasn't total freedom. And I'll come to that eventually. But let's start with just emancipation in terms of the Africans feeling free. Right? And Emancipation Day, the 1st of August, was also a time when they felt as they were men and women. Fully men and fully women. They weren't supposed to be fully men or fully women. That's the point about it. So they felt good about it, although they knew that they were restricted in terms of what they can do. Now, even when you look at the first part of the top there, Emancipation Day was also the rebirth of the African Caribbean family. There was no family scenario before. There was no family. The slave master was the family head. He was the master. He was the husband. The white slave master was the husband for nearly 100 and something years, from 1823 in St. Kitts, 1623 in St. Kitts, 1625 in Barbados, and I can go on to tell you when the British they were in the Caribbean. And at that time, there was no family. There's no African family. None. The husband wasn't, the father wasn't supposed to be there because the slave master would kick him out. And the women, of course, were at the mercy of the slave masters and his friends. So there was no family. But there was a family that could start and be rebuilt on the 1st of August, 1834. That's a fact. So that's what happened then on the 1st of August. And I can go right through to show you that the initiative was taken by women. The women were the first people who actually took the initiative. They went out looking for their children on the 2nd of August. That's what they did. They were going to find their children in different plantations, one by one. I have evidence to show you. There's a book called To Shoot Hard Labor, written by Keithlin Smith and his brother, to show you that on the 1st of August, what happened is that a certain lady by the name of Mother Rachel, her daughter was actually taken away from her, and she didn't know where the daughter was. So on the 2nd of August, what she did, she went from plantation to plantation in Antigua, and she took 3 days to find her daughter eventually. And she found the daughter in one of Torrington's plantation. And by the way, a plantation was just like a concentration camp. A plantation was a labor camp. It was a death camp. It was similar in terms of its brutality and inhumanity. So eventually, Mother Rachel found her daughter. And what a reunion on the 2nd, or maybe let's say on the 5th or the 6th of August, because she loved her child, as I think all mothers do. And she had to find her child, because in those days as well, plantation owners never told mothers or fathers where the kids were sold to. In fact, let's take you have a borough. Let's say, I can only talk about London. Let's say you have the borough of Hackney, the borough of Islington, the borough of Haringey. Plantations were not supposed to allow Africans to move out of it, ever. So if you're living in Hackney, you couldn't say, well, I want to go and see brother and sister down in Islington. That wasn't permitted. So what happened to Mother Rachel and her daughter was that she went somewhere maybe 10 miles away. And because Mother Rachel didn't know how to find her, and actually Antigua isn't a big place. I mean, I went around Antigua within a few hours in a car. But that was how the enslaved Africans were, and therefore Emancipation Day was the answer. No, that's the Caribbean. And the British, they sent kits there, up there, and then you have Antigua, you have Barbados, a big spread, and then you have got Guyana, which is the largest of them all in terms of the British scenario. You've got Haiti, you've got Cuba, which is obviously the biggest of the islands, where the Spanish were, and you've got Jamaica, and so on. But I want to emphasize this, in the sense that this particular man, Toussaint Louverture, was the inspiration behind Emancipation, right? 1791, 92, and so on. He was the one. In fact, why I put the two pictures is that Kamati Dankar, a good friend of ours, he was the one who drew this particular modern picture in terms of Toussaint. And that was done in 2004. Because he was the inspiration behind Emancipation in the sense that he beat the French out of Haiti. He beat the British, because the British sent troops to Haiti to take it. That's the point. They sent 40,000 troops to actually take Haiti. Didn't happen. Toussaint and his men kicked them out. And then the Spanish. So in that sense, this particular man, who was well respected by the British, he was highly regarded by the British, this gentleman there. So the Africans in Haiti ensured that there was not going to be slavery in Haiti. And that's exactly what happened. So in 1804, they declared their independence and they declared themselves a republic. But I think it should be noted, though, that that wasn't the first rebellion and revolution as such. It was attempted in Berbice, which is a part of Ghana now, in 1763 by another African-born, who actually tried to beat the Dutch. His name is Kofi, or Kofi. Kofi tried it, and he withstood the Dutch for 1 year, or nearly a year, possibly more. What the British did, the British then got the Dutch to help them. They got the Spanish to help them. These people who were actually fighting for slaves and sugar eventually came together just to beat Kofi and his people. And they did. Because eventually, Kofi actually committed suicide. That is the mentality he had, that he wouldn't be caught. He was a brave man, and he actually killed himself. But the main thing is that these men and women were fighting for their freedom, for liberty. They were fighting to be free. And of course, they eventually they died. Now, I push to this. And I want to take these three pictures in one to show you that the inspiration of Toussaint inspired that man there who is with his hand up, Bussa. Again, Bussa in Barbados, he felt that he needs to be free. And that if the British don't want to give it to him by discussion, because we were told by, I think, a famous politicians, it's best to have jaw than war. All right? But then they didn't want to talk to Africans. They didn't. So he eventually felt that if you want to talk to me and talk about freedom, I want to have war. I want a war with you. But of course, you can't actually beat the British with just knives and a little bit of gun, and the guns don't operate. So eventually, that particular rebellion didn't succeed for lack of ammunition, for lack of guns and whatever. And the interesting thing about it is that he was helped by a lady by the name of Nanny Grigg, who told them what was going on in London, because at the time, Wilberforce, Thomas Clarkson, and all the people there were talking and agitating for abolition. Bussa and his friends in Barbados heard that and felt that something is going on, liberty is at hand, so why are these people who are local, why are they preventing us from being free? Why are the local plantation owners preventing us from being free? So they got impatient, and eventually their patience ran out. And that's exactly what happened. They rebelled. The British brought in troops and the Navy, and they quelled the rebellion. But then, that was 1816. 1823 now, another rebellion. This is a major rebellion now, right? The Africans don't really want to be enslaved. So a rebellion is going on and has gone on in Demerara, Comina. Okay, we don't have a portrait of Comina. Even that particular that particular statue there is just something that someone had a thought to have him look like that, and that's exactly what it is. We don't know what a man looked like. In those days, we had a demonstration and an idea from an artist as to how you draw and portraits. In those days, Africans could draw, but no way their drawings are going to last. All right? Your talent, brother, is important. In those days, we had people who can draw, talented people from Africa. They weren't allowed to have paintings. So we only have to have a street, right? And now, I'm from Georgetown as well, so I know this particular place. I was there a year and a half ago, Comina Street. And Comina Street is not far from a place called Parade Ground in Georgetown, where they killed some of the Africans. And not only that, they didn't only kill them by shooting, they cut their heads off, right? Just like how it's happening in the Middle East. And they laid their heads on sticks, along the street, so that the Africans who pass will see the heads. That's how brutal the actual plantation owners were. And then we come to one of the greatest men, right? Samuel Sharp. Samuel Sharp in Jamaica. Now, this man was a Christian man. He was a deacon. He wanted peace. He learned to read and write. Well, at least he learned to read. But the main thing is that he said, look, these plantation owners don't want to pay us. Let us sit down the day after Christmas. A sit-down strike. We want pay. In fact, he didn't even ask for freedom. He wanted pay. And that didn't happen. So he organized the people around St. James in Jamaica, all around that area in the west of Jamaica. And he organized more than 70,000 African people, men and women, in Jamaica. Only a part of Jamaica, not Kingston and those places that side. And, well, when they saw these Africans sitting and don't want to do any work, they actually certainly brutalized them. And therefore, a big rebellion took place. And lives were lost, etc., etc. And they eventually caught Sam Sharp. But the point is this. Something like £1 million damage was done in terms of fire and so on. And it's interesting that when eventually you've got these leaflets, look at the website. There's a website on it, a Making Freedom website. And you'll see the story behind it. £1 million damage was done, and lots of plantations were destroyed. 1 million. Now, £1 million in those days is equivalent to £1 billion today. 1 billion, right? Damage was done. That's exactly what happened there in Jamaica. And that particular incident now caused the British Parliament now to look up and stand up and think, well, look, these Africans are going to burn the whole place down. Because they want to be free. They're prepared to be martyrs to be free. That's exactly what happened in those three scenarios. They were prepared to be martyrs, and they were martyrs. Bussa was, Kumina was, Sam Sharp was, and many of his people. And when you look at it over the Caribbean, the amount of them, people who actually died for freedom. Let's take Haiti, for example. In Haiti, over 100,000 French, British, and Spanish were killed over Haiti. But nearly 250,000 Haitians died just to be free. Just defending themselves to be free. Right? And in fact, because Africans weren't supposed to write, we were getting that information from others, apart from Africans. They couldn't write. The last speaker spoke about literary. That is good. Equiano did write. Right? He pleaded. Right? He was in Montserrat. He saw what was going on in Montserrat. And by the way, The slaves in Montserrat rebelled, I think a year after he left. I think something like 1768 or 67. No, 67. And he was writing about the damage being done to Africans' body and mind and spirit and soul in Montserrat, knowing or unknowing then that eventually the following year they were going to rebel. And they rebelled on St. Patrick's Day. Oh yes, St. Patrick's Day. Because that was when the Irish were having a great time. But somebody eventually spilled the beans. And, the Africans were caught and they were beheaded, they were this, they were that. But the main point is that Africans are fighting to be free. And that is exactly how things went completely. There's a saying or a quotation by John Locke, 1632 to 1704. That's how he lived. He said, slavery is no more than a state of war between a conqueror with absolute power and the conquered. A state of war. Slavery is always a state of war, and the consequences of slavery, or the legacy of slavery, is a state of war. Because people will always be angry. People will always be feeling, unjustly done. If there's no justice, there can't be peace. And that's exactly how the Africans felt there in the Caribbean. So we move on to this. Emancipation Day. Now, again, the painter. It's the painter who did this, right? And he must have had a big canvas to actually print the detail. There was no Pentax or Canon in those days, right? And all these fancy digital cameras. So an artist had to do this, and this is Spanish Town. And we told that Lionel Smith, one of the officials from the British government, he was there to have an array of and splendor and so on the 1st of August. That is exactly what happened here on the 1st of August. So this is what, and by the way, this is not totally true, right, from what I've read. But somehow the artist has a particular, is it license, you say? Yes. And that's exactly what happened here. And here you have the lovely middle-class Africans, how they were well-dressed. Not many Africans had good clothes, Right? One or possibly two bit of clothing per year. And again, in the book, To Shoot Hard Labor, we were told by the writer that some people had clothing that even when it's raining, they don't want to go outside to wet that one piece of clothes. And not only that, they have to go to work wet. Regardless, they can't miss work. If they miss work, they can be imprisoned. That's the point about it. They'll be imprisoned, and that's a fact from this particular writer. So this particular picture showing you how lovely those Africans are looking. Some of them maybe are looking like that. But 80% of the people really didn't take part in this particular thing. Some of them went to church, some of them actually took it easy, some of them didn't know what was going on, and some of them were apprehensive about emancipation. They're suspicious. And they were right, because the day after the 1st of August 1834, something came in called apprenticeship. Apprenticeship. Now, you and I know, you've been hearing about apprenticeship on television, by the so-called, the leaders. Leaders. Apprenticeship. This is a case where these apprentices had to work for nothing, right? Well, I'm wrong there. They were supposed to work with no wages, but they'll be given clothes, they'll be given a bit of food, they'll be given a bit of that type of thing for another 6 years. And they didn't want that. So, in a particular place, I think it's in St. Kitts, those men and women kick up a fuss. Emancipation, you can't tell us about apprenticeship. And there was a lot of trouble again, trouble. People like Joseph Sturge went to Montserrat, went to Trinidad, went to Barbados and so on, and began to lobby. So David Sturge certainly is one of the heroes for this part of the whole thing about emancipation. And then so much fuss was made that the British Parliament decided, well, they'll have to have full emancipation. Full emancipation, yet I can say this to you that it wasn't really full, because all the economic restrictions remained. Africans couldn't buy a house, Africans couldn't own their little garden, Africans couldn't do this, So what is freedom? That's exactly what happened to them on Emancipation Day and the day after. So were they fooled? They were fooled in some way, but they felt good about being free. That's the point. And that's why, no doubt, the 1st of August is an important day. Now, on this particular last slide, who is this gentleman? John Gladstone, enslaver. His son is William Gladstone, 3 or 4 times Prime Minister of Britain. And he holds in Demerara a lot of slaves. In fact, I have the information here. And this comes from the London University, the project that they're doing. He had something like 3,368 slaves. That's what he did. He had lots of plantations in Guyana. I know some of the places that these plantations were at myself. I know where they were. And, but eventually, Gladstone sells out most of the plantations. And he invests in India. That's what he's put his money in. He invests in the railways, Bristol and to London and various things. He invests in the railways and everything else. He invests also in ships. More than that, he invests in actually getting Indians to go to Guyana and Trinidad and elsewhere as indentured laborers. Another form of slavery, right? Indentureship was another form of slavery. And this is the man that actually started it. John Gladstone. And you know something? Even when William Gladstone was Prime Minister, he had plantations in Guyana. Right? I've got the evidence on that one. A place called Wales, the Wales plantation. But eventually he sells it. And he was the one, William Gladstone, who was the one that brought about a royal commission to go into Guyana to investigate his own plantation. But eventually he sold it. It's all evidential in that sense. Now, what happens to this gentleman? In fact, he becomes Sir. So he got, in the 1840s, he gets a knighthood. He becomes Sir John. Before then, he gets a lot of money, right? 136,000 and 115 pounds. That's it. Now, this is equivalent to 137 million pounds today. That was the value of his slaves. 137 million. So throughout the lives of all the Gladstones, they were reasonably well off. And that was only a part of his investment, you know. That's the thing. He had investments in Liverpool and in India and elsewhere. He was very rich. And there's something. I met a descendant of the Gladstone when I had the exhibition in London. That was about a year and 3 months ago. And she said to me, I'm a Gladstone, directly from William, but, I'm not rich. I'm not rich. And it's understandable. She didn't look rich, but that's not the point. The point there was that there are still Gladstones about, but no doubt they may not necessarily be as rich, because eventually I understand that the money was sort of squandered, and lots of them lost monies. The other person whom I haven't got here is Codrington, right? Sir Christopher Codrington. He and his people also got a lot of money. They got something like, altogether, £42,000. But when you add it up and you look at the actual currency today, it's 43 million. They had plantations in Barbados, plantations in Antigua, the place called Betty's Hope. I passed there when I was there in Antigua. The whole thing about this is this. Emancipation is a story. Eventually, emancipation happens. I'm going to wrap things up now. And colonialism comes in full force. And by the way, colonialism is another form of slavery. Colonialism is another form of slavery. Because when you read the text, when you read the stories that happened to the men and women after 1838, the only difference is that they weren't getting beaten as they were, on their backs with a nine, and the women weren't stripped naked to be beaten. That didn't happen in that sort of fullness, although there was some beating. But the main thing is that the pressure that the Africans were put under from 1838 to 1938 was tremendous, in the sense this. In 1838 to 1834, the wage, a day's wage was 1 shilling a day, 5 pence. A shilling a day. Well, okay, that could have gone somewhere. In 1938, it was a shilling a day. A shilling a day for over 100 years. And there's a particular documentary called Mutiny. I would hope that you guys would get it. Called Mutiny, about the First World War. Caribbean people in the First World War. And there's a Jamaican guy there saying that, some people were getting 9 pence a day. And the women, 5 and 6 pence a day. So the undermining, really, of the Caribbean means that people have to emigrate. And I'm saying this is my particular conclusion, is that if you had to use 3 words to account for people moving around the world, it's sugar and slavery. If you had to use 1 word, it's sugar. Sugar. Some of us were from the Caribbean and Africa, even Africa. Sugar. Because that was the oil, really, of that era in terms of money. So my point here is that emancipation is an important thing to remember, and that it should be commemorated on the 1st of August because that's how the men and women did it then, right? And that all should know about that particular event. And it also shows that Africans did something for themselves. If the Africans didn't actually rebel and had a revolution in that sense, according to Wilberforce, he was talking about gradual emancipation. Well, how long is gradual? How long is gradual? And that is why we think that Wilberforce made a mistake there, because Sam Sharp and those men we saw, and women, you can see them, they believed in immediate emancipation. Thank you very much.